The evening sun cast long shadows across the polished marble floors of the Bennett Anderson penthouse, its golden light reflecting off crystal chandeliers and designer furniture that spoke of wealth and refinement. In this carefully curated world lived James Bennett, a 35-year-old architect whose success story was the talk of Boston's elite circles. His journey from a middle-class background to the owner of one of the city's most prestigious architectural firms was a testament to his determination and talent. Yet beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life, shadows lurked, secrets waiting to unravel the very fabric of his existence. Rachel Anderson-Bennett, his wife of 2 years, stood before their floor-to-ceiling windows, her slender figure silhouetted against the cityscape she had fought so hard to claim as her own. At 32, she was the epitome of grace and sophistication, every gesture, every word carefully calculated to maintain the illusion of old money and refined taste. But the truth of her origins lay buried beneath designer clothes and perfectly manicured nails, a truth of community college nights spent waiting tables, of a childhood where luxury was nothing more than a distant dream glimpsed through the windows of other people's lives. The penthouse, with its sweeping views of Boston Harbor, was a testament to their success, or so it appeared to their social circle. What remained hidden were the mounting mortgages, the carefully concealed credit card statements that told a different story. Rachel's obsession with maintaining their status consumed her, driving her to make choices that would soon cast long shadows over their future. As she moved through their home, her Louboutin heels clicking against the marble floors, Rachel's mind raced with the constant calculations that had become second nature. Every dinner party, every social engagement was an opportunity to reinforce their position in society, to distance herself further from the girl who once counted pennies to buy groceries. Her recent purchase of a Cartier bracelet had maxed out yet another credit card, but in Rachel's world, appearance was everything. James remained blissfully unaware of the financial tightrope they walked, his focus divided between his growing firm and the constant shadow of his father, Richard Bennett. At 60, Richard was a titan of real estate, his empire casting a long shadow over Boston's skyline. The strain between father and son was palpable, years of unmet expectations and Richard's overbearing success creating a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. The tension in their relationship was evident even in photographs, like the one that sat in James's office, a formal shot from a charity gala where Richard's commanding presence seemed to diminish his son's accomplishments. Rachel understood this dynamic all too well, using it to her advantage, carefully stoking James's desire to prove himself while maintaining the lifestyle that his independence sometimes struggled to provide. Their social circle was carefully curated, each friendship a strategic alliance in Rachel's grand design. She moved through their world with practiced ease, her charm disarming even the most suspicious observers. But there was one person who remained immune to her carefully constructed facade, Michael Wright, James's best friend since their college days. Michael watched from the periphery, his keen eyes noting the subtle inconsistencies in Rachel's carefully crafted narrative. As a successful investment banker with a background in forensic accounting, he saw what others missed: the slight tension in her smile when finances were discussed, the careful deflection when questions about her past arose. Tonight, at their weekly dinner gathering, Rachel's performance was flawless as always. She floated through their penthouse, playing the perfect hostess to their guests from Boston's elite circles. Her laughter tinkled like crystal, her stories of working her way through community college carefully crafted to inspire rather than reveal the desperate ambition that had driven her. But Michael's presence cast a shadow over her perfect evening. His eyes followed her movements, noting the new Cartier bracelet that adorned her wrist, mentally calculating its cost against what he knew of James's firm's recent projects. He saw the flash of anxiety in her eyes when discussions turned to Richard Bennett's latest real estate triumph, the way she subtly steered conversations away from certain topics. As the evening wore on, the weight of Rachel's secrets seemed to press down upon her. Each credit card hidden in her private safe told a story of desperation masked as success. Each carefully curated outfit and piece of jewelry was another link in the chain of deception that bound her to this life she had orchestrated. James remained enraptured by his wife, his love for her evident in every glance, every gentle touch. He was proud of their life together, seeing in Rachel everything he had ever wanted: beauty, grace, and what he believed to be genuine love. His own success story, rising from middle-class origins to compete with Boston's architectural elite, made him blind to the calculation behind his wife's every move. But beneath the surface of their perfect life, a storm was brewing. Rachel's mounting debts, her secret past, and the carefully hidden connections that would soon come to light all threatened to shatter the illusion she had so carefully constructed. Michael's growing suspicions were like the first distant rumbles of thunder, warning of the tempest to come. As their guests departed and the penthouse fell silent, Rachel stood once again before the windows, the city lights below twinkling like the diamonds she coveted. In her reflection, she saw both who she was and who she pretended to be, the ambitious girl from a lower middle-class background who had clawed her way up, and the sophisticated woman she had become. The weight of her secrets pressed down upon her, each one a thread in the complex web she had woven. Soon, Richard Bennett would return to Boston, and with his arrival, the carefully constructed facade would begin to crack. But for now, in the quiet of their luxury penthouse, Rachel continued to play her part, the perfect wife, the social butterfly, the woman who had it all. Little did James know that his perfect life was built on a foundation of lies, each one carefully crafted by the woman he loved. As Michael's suspicions grew and Richard's return loomed, the countdown to revelation had already begun. The perfect facade was about to crumble, taking with it everything they had built, in a story of ambition, betrayal, and deadly consequences that would shock Boston's elite to its core. The stage was set, the players in position, and the tragedy that would unfold would prove that sometimes the highest price we pay is for the lies we choose to believe. The news of Richard Bennett's return rippled through Boston's social circles like a cold wind, carrying with it whispers of business deals and international expansion. His private jet had barely touched down at Logan International when Rachel's phone lit up with messages from their social circle. The morning light streaming through their penthouse windows seemed to dim as she read the text from James. "Dad's back. Wants to have dinner tomorrow night." Rachel's hands trembled as she set down her phone, the perfectly manicured nails digging into her palms. The Cartier bracelet on her wrist suddenly felt like a shackle, a reminder of the precipice she walked. In the reflection of her vanity mirror, she caught a glimpse of fear in her eyes. The same fear she had seen in her mother's eyes decades ago when creditors would knock at their door. The memories crashed over her like waves, pulling her back to a cramped two-bedroom apartment in South Boston. The image was vivid. Her mother, Linda Anderson, sitting at their scratched kitchen table, bills spread before her like a losing hand of cards. The envelope marked "Final Notice" in angry red letters. The empty chair where her father should have been, had he not walked out when Rachel was just 7, leaving nothing but a legacy of unpaid bills and broken promises. Never again, Rachel had whispered to herself back then, watching her mother work double shifts at the diner. The same words echoed in her mind now, 25 years later, as she stood in her walk-in closet worth more than her mother had earned in a decade. The sound of her phone ringing jolted her back to the present. Kate Morrison's name flashed on the screen, sending another wave of anxiety through her. Kate, her former roommate from their community college days, who had witnessed Rachel's transformation from ambitious waitress to calculated social climber. Kate, who knew too much. "I saw Richard Bennett's back in town." Kate's voice carried a warning. "Remember when you used to serve him coffee at the Capitol Grill? Before everything." Rachel's mind raced back to those early days. She had worked 3 jobs, waitressing at the Capitol Grill during the day, bartending at night, and doing administrative work at a real estate office on weekends. Every shift was calculated, positioned where Boston's wealthy congregated. She had studied them like a scientist, learning their mannerisms, their preferences, the way old money carried itself differently from new. "That's ancient history, Kate." Rachel's voice was steady, practiced. "And I'd appreciate if we kept it that way." But Kate wasn't finished. "I still have those photos from when you first met him. When you were planning everything. Does James know about Dash?" "I have to go." Rachel cut her off, her heart pounding. "James needs me for a client dinner." The lie came easily, as all her lies did now. She ended the call and sank onto her closet ottoman, surrounded by the trappings of wealth she had accumulated like armor. Each designer piece told a story of calculation and determination. The Chanel suits she wore to charity board meetings, the Hermes scarves that signaled old money breeding she didn't possess, the Van Cleef & Arpels jewelry that brought her entree into Boston's inner circles. Through the closet door, she could hear James in his home office, his voice carrying as he discussed his latest architectural project. His success had been part of her calculation. Yes, but something unexpected had happened along the way. She had grown to care for him. His kindness, so different from his father's calculating nature, sometimes made her guilt surface like a drowning woman gasping for air. Richard Bennett's return threatened everything. She remembered their first real encounter, not at the Capitol Grill where she had served him coffee, but at the real estate office where she had orchestrated their chance meeting. She had studied him for months, his habits, his preferences, his weaknesses. A recently divorced man of power and wealth, vulnerable in ways his business rivals never saw but that Rachel recognized instantly. Their relationship had been brief but calculated, each move planned like a chess game. What Richard never knew was that his son James had already been her true target. The father was merely a stepping stone, a way to learn the family dynamics, to position herself perfectly for when she accidentally met James at a charity gala months after her disappearance from Richard's life. A text message pierced her reverie. It was from Claire Winchester, one of the wealthy friends Rachel had carefully cultivated. "Darling, heard Richard's back. Didn't you mention once that you'd worked with him years ago? Must be amusing to have him as your father-in-law now." Rachel stared at the message, her carefully constructed world seeming to tilt on its axis. She had always been meticulous about her story. Any mentions of knowing Richard before James were casual, professional, forgettable. But now, with his return, every carefully planted seed threatened to grow into a choking vine. The sound of James's footsteps approaching sent her into action. She quickly dried her eyes, checked her makeup, and emerged from the closet wearing a smile as artificial as the pearls around her neck. "Darling," she called out, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. "Should I make reservations for tomorrow night with your father? Perhaps at El Espalier?" James appeared in the doorway, his face showing the familiar tension that any mention of his father brought. "He wants us to come to the house in Beacon Hill," he replied. "Says he has some big news to share." Rachel felt the walls closing in. Richard's house in Beacon Hill, where she had once played her part in his life, where evidence of her past might still linger. The house where she had first learned the layout of the Bennett family wealth, where she had discovered the strained dynamics between father and son that she would later use to her advantage. As she moved to embrace James, to offer comfortable words about facing his father together, Rachel's mind was already racing through scenarios, escape routes, contingency plans. The weight of her secrets pressed down on her like the heavy jewelry she wore, the symbols of success that now felt like chains. The sun was setting over Boston Harbor, casting long shadows across their perfect life. Tomorrow, she would have to face Richard Bennett across a dinner table, maintaining her facade while praying he would keep their secret. The price of her ambition, of her desperate climb from poverty to prosperity, was coming due. And as the night settled over the city, Rachel Anderson-Bennett prepared herself for a battle that would determine not just her future, but her very survival in the world she had schemed so hard to enter. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shatter the perfect image she had created, bringing to light the dark ambitions that had driven a waitress from South Boston to orchestrate her way into one of the city's most powerful families. The question that remained was, how much would the truth cost her when it finally emerged? The mahogany drawer in James's home office made a soft sound as it caught, stuck on something that shouldn't have been there. Late afternoon sun streamed through the windows as he reached deeper, his fingers brushing against an envelope that had fallen behind. What he pulled out would shatter the foundations of everything he believed about his life. Credit card statements, bank documents, a hidden trail of mounting debt that told a story so different from the one he thought he knew. James's hands trembled as he spread the papers across his desk, each statement revealing another piece of a puzzle he never knew existed. $70,000 in credit card debt. Liquid cash withdrawals that made no sense. And buried beneath it all, an old divorce settlement with a name that made his blood run cold. Meanwhile, in the living room, Rachel paced, her Louboutin heels clicking against the marble floors like a countdown. Her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications from credit card companies, each one a reminder of the house of cards she had built. She could feel it all slipping away, the carefully constructed facade crumbling like sand through her fingers. The memories flooded back, unbidden and unwelcome. That first meeting with Richard Bennett, orchestrated down to the smallest detail. She had posed as a high-end real estate agent, showing him a penthouse in Back Bay that she knew would appeal to his taste for luxury. Rachel had studied him for months, his preferences, his vulnerabilities, the way his eyes lingered just a moment too long on younger women. The crown molding is original, she had said that day, watching his reflection in the window as he moved closer. It's rare to find such attention to detail in modern buildings. She had worn a navy Chanel suit, borrowed from a consignment shop she couldn't afford, her hair styled to project sophisticated youth. Richard had been predictable, falling into the trap she had set with such precision. A dinner invitation to discuss property options turned into weekly meetings. His recent divorce had left him vulnerable, seeking validation in the attention of a beautiful young woman who seemed to understand his world. Their whirlwind courtship and secret marriage had been the talk of Boston's elite circles, the real estate mogul and the ambitious young agent. Rachel played her part perfectly, the devoted wife who brought youth and energy back into Richard's life. But it was never about love. Each dinner party, each social event was an opportunity to study the world she intended to claim as her own. The divorce's settlement was generous, she whispered now, touching the window as if she could reach through time and warn her younger self. Richard had been surprisingly amenable to her terms, perhaps suspecting but never voicing that their entire marriage had been a calculated move on her part. The money from the settlement had given her a taste of what real wealth felt like. But more importantly, it had given her intimate knowledge of the Bennett family, their dynamics, their weaknesses, and most crucially, their prodigal son James, who had rejected his father's empire to build his own. Meeting James had been her masterpiece of manipulation. She had waited 6 months after the divorce, enough time for the gossip to die down. Through carefully cultivated connections, she orchestrated their chance meeting at the annual Children's Hospital Benefit Gala. She had worn red that night, knowing it would catch his eye. "You must be James Bennett," she had said, pretending not to know everything about him already. "Your work on the new children's wing is remarkable." She had studied his architectural portfolio extensively, preparing herself to be exactly what he was looking for. The sound of footsteps from the office jolted Rachel back to the present. Her heart stopped as she heard papers rustling, knowing instinctively what James had found. The hidden statements, the breadcrumbs of her past that she had thought were safely concealed. On James's desk lay another document, one that had just arrived that morning. An anonymous letter, its contents devastating in their simplicity. "Ask your wife about her marriage to Richard Bennett. Ask her about the real reason she chose you." Kate's betrayal was complete. Rachel had known her former roommate might break, had seen the guilt eating away at her every time they met. Kate had been there from the beginning, watching Rachel's transformation from struggling waitress to calculated social climber. "You can't build happiness on lies," Kate had warned her, just last week over coffee. "James deserves to know the truth." Rachel had dismissed her concerns, secure in the belief that Kate would never actually act on her threats. The sound of James's office door opening echoed through the penthouse like a gunshot. Rachel turned, her face composed even as her world teetered on the edge of collapse. She watched her husband approach, the papers clutched in his hand, and knew that the moment she had feared had finally arrived. "What are these?" James's voice was quiet, controlled, but his eyes held a storm of emotions. He held up the credit card statements first, but Rachel's gaze was fixed on the divorce papers just visible behind them. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Outside, the Boston skyline glittered indifferently, the same view that had witnessed so many of her calculated moves in this game of ambition and survival. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across their perfect life, shadows that would soon swallow everything she had built. Rachel opened her mouth to speak, to try one last desperate manipulation, but the words wouldn't come. The weight of her secrets, her lies, her calculated rise from poverty to prosperity, suddenly seemed too heavy to bear. In the fading light, she caught a glimpse of their reflection in the window, husband and wife, their perfect image now distorted by the truth that lay exposed between them. The stage was set for a confrontation that would tear apart not just their marriage, but the entire Bennett family. As Rachel faced her husband, she realized that the price of ambition was about to become due, and the cost would be higher than she had ever imagined. The sun finally set over Boston Harbor, plunging their penthouse into shadows that matched the darkness of the secrets now laid bare. The time for lies was over. The truth, with all its devastating consequences, was about to emerge, and nothing in Rachel's carefully planned life had prepared her for this moment of reckoning. The manila envelope fell from James's trembling hands, scattering photographs across his office floor like fallen leaves. Each image told a story he couldn't bear to accept. Rachel in a white dress, standing beside his father Richard Bennett. Their wedding day, 5 years before she had supposedly met James for the first time. The time stamps on the photos were merciless in their truth, each one driving another nail into the coffin of his marriage. In their bedroom, Rachel frantically searched through her hidden safe, her movements becoming more desperate with each passing moment. She had kept evidence of her past life, insurance against the day Richard might try to expose her. But now those same documents threatened to destroy everything she had built. Her fingers brushed against old passports, bank statements, and the prenuptial agreement she had signed with Richard, all pieces of a past she had tried to bury. The sound of the front door opening froze her in place. Heavy footsteps echoed through their penthouse, not James's familiar stride, but the commanding presence she knew all too well. Richard Bennett had come to collect on the truth. "I always knew this day would come," Richard's voice carried from the doorway, making Rachel's blood run cold. She turned to face her former husband, the man whose life she had used as a stepping stone to reach his son. Richard stood there, his imposing figure silhouetted against the hallway light, looking every bit the real estate mogul who had once been captivated by her calculated charm. "You were thorough, I'll give you that," Richard continued, pulling out his phone to show her something that made her heart stop. Screenshots of her research, dating back years before she had met either Bennett man. Browser histories showing searches about the family's wealth, their businesses, their vulnerabilities. "My security team found all of it, Rachel. Or should I use your birth name? The one you legally changed before you began your project." The weight of her deception pressed down on her like a physical force. She remembered the countless hours spent in public libraries, researching the Bennett family's history. The careful documentation of Richard's routine, learning when he visited that specific high-end real estate office where she had orchestrated their chance meeting. The months spent studying James from afar, learning his preferences, his desires, his wounds, everything she would need to become his perfect match. "I loved him," Rachel whispered, surprising herself with the truth in those words. "James, it wasn't all a lie. Not with him." Richard's laugh was bitter, echoing off the marble floors. "Love? You wouldn't recognize love if it came with a price tag, Rachel. You saw an empire and calculated the easiest way to claim it. I was just the first step. The practice run before you went after your real target." Their confrontation was interrupted by James's voice, quiet but deadly from the doorway. "How long?" he asked, holding up a photograph of Rachel and Richard at a charity gala, dated 3 years before his own marriage. "How long have you been playing this game?" The truth spilled out like poison, unstoppable now that the dam had broken. Rachel watched as James learned everything, how she had studied his father's habits, orchestrated their marriage, planned their divorce, all while gathering the information she would need to make herself irresistible to the son. The careful way she had positioned herself in James's social circle, ensuring they would meet at exactly the right moment, when she had transformed herself into exactly what he was looking for. "I tracked every woman you dated," she confessed, her voice hollow. "I knew what you wanted, someone ambitious but not threatening, sophisticated but approachable. Someone who would understand your need to succeed on your own terms, away from your father's shadow. I became that woman." James staggered back as if physically struck. The Children's Hospital Gala, our first meeting, was planned 6 months in advance, Richard finished for her. "She knew you would be there, knew exactly what to say about your architectural work. Every detail was calculated." The room seemed to spin as James processed each revelation. His mind raced back through every moment of their courtship, their marriage, seeing now the subtle manipulations he had missed. The way she had always known exactly what to say, how to support his ambitions while stoking his desire to prove himself independent of his father. But I didn't expect. Rachel's voice cracked, genuine emotion breaking through her carefully constructed facade. I didn't expect to actually fall in love with you, James. That wasn't part of the plan. Love. James's laugh was harsh, unfamiliar. You married my father as a stepping stone to get to me, and you want to talk about love. The full scope of her manipulation lay exposed in the harsh penthouse lights. Every careful move, every calculated decision that had brought her from a struggling waitress to the wife of one of Boston's most promising architects. The research, the planning, the years spent crafting herself into the perfect trap for both Bennett men. Show him the rest, Richard commanded, his voice heavy with a father's pain. Show him what you really had planned. With trembling hands, Rachel opened her safe one last time, withdrawing a file that contained her ultimate strategy. Documents outlining how she would eventually position herself to take control of both James's firm and, through careful manipulation, portions of Richard's real estate empire. A long game that would have taken years to execute, using both men's weaknesses against them. James read through the papers, each page revealing another layer of betrayal. His wife hadn't just deceived him about her past. She had mapped out their entire future, planning each move like a chess master plotting checkmate. The sun had set over Boston Harbor, leaving their penthouse in shadows that matched the darkness of the moment. In the dimness, James could barely make out Rachel's face, the face he had loved, the face that had hidden such calculated deception. I want you out, he said finally, his voice devoid of emotion. Tonight. Your things can be sent to wherever you're going. But I want you gone. Rachel stood frozen, watching as both Bennett men turned their backs on her. The empire she had spent years trying to claim was crumbling, taking with it the one thing she hadn't expected to find, real love. As she watched James walk away, she realized that her ambition had finally cost her something money couldn't buy. The night grew darker, matching the void that had opened in their lives. 3 people bound together by lies and betrayal, each now facing the consequences of a game that had spun wildly out of control. The truth had been revealed, but the real devastation was yet to come, waiting in the wings like a patient predator, ready to claim its due. The Boston social scene buzzed with whispers and speculation as James Bennett withdrew from every charity board, every social engagement, every carefully cultivated connection that Rachel had established. Their absence from the annual Children's Hospital Gala, where their romance had supposedly begun, set tongues wagging through the city's elite circles. The perfect couple's sudden disappearance created a void that quickly filled with rumors and half-truths. In their penthouse, now feeling more like a mausoleum of their marriage, Rachel watched her world crumble through the screens of her many phones. Each unanswered text, each declined invitation, each social media notification marked another crack in her facade. The carefully constructed image of Rachel Anderson-Bennett, social butterfly and perfect wife, was dissolving like a reflection in troubled waters. Just give him time, she whispered to her reflection, adjusting a strand of pearls that felt more like a noose. But time was the one luxury she no longer had. The financial house of cards she had built was teetering on the edge of collapse. Richard Bennett sat in his Beacon Hill study, a glass of scotch untouched before him, staring at old photographs, evidence of his own role in this tragedy. His security team had compiled a comprehensive file on Rachel's past, revealing a web of deception that even he, with all his business acumen, hadn't seen coming. The guilt ate at him, knowing he had inadvertently helped position this woman to destroy his son's life. I should have warned him, Richard muttered, remembering the day Rachel had first disappeared from his life. He had suspected then that something wasn't right, but pride had kept him silent. The shame of being duped by a younger woman, the embarrassment of a failed marriage, he had buried it all, never suspecting she would resurface in James's life. Meanwhile, Rachel's desperate attempts to maintain control grew more frantic. She appeared unannounced at charity events, trying to maintain the connections that had been her lifeline to Boston's elite. But doors that had once opened eagerly now remained firmly closed. The whispers followed her everywhere, whispers about her past, about her marriage to Richard, about the web of lies she had woven. "You don't understand," she pleaded with Kate over the phone, her voice cracking. "I came from nothing. You remember those days, the roaches in our apartment, the endless shifts serving coffee to people who wouldn't even look at us. I had to become someone else to survive." But Kate's response was cold. "You became a monster, Rachel. And now everyone knows it." The truth of her background began to emerge in pieces, like a dark puzzle assembling itself. Born Rachel Marie Cooper in a South Boston housing project, she had changed her name at 18, the first step in erasing her past. The community college education she claimed was incomplete, abandoned when she realized that charm and beauty could open doors faster than degrees. James discovered the extent of her financial schemes one rainy Tuesday morning. His firm's accountant, pale and shaking, laid out spreadsheets showing systematic embezzlement spanning their entire marriage. Rachel had been siphoning money from company accounts, using her position as his wife to authorize transfers that looked legitimate on the surface. The total amount, the accountant hesitated, is just over $2 million. The revelation hit James like a physical blow. Every renovation to their penthouse, every designer purchase, every lavish vacation, all paid for with stolen money. His money. The success he had built independently of his father's empire had been quietly bleeding away to fund Rachel's obsession with status. The confrontation, when it came, erupted in their penthouse kitchen. Rachel stood at the marble island, her fingers tracing the edges of yet another credit card bill, when James entered. The tension between them was electric, charged with months of unspoken accusations and revealed lies. "Who are you?" James's voice was quiet, controlled, but his eyes blazed with fury. "Who are you really?" Rachel's laugh was hollow, echoing off the expensive appliances she had insisted they needed. "You want the truth now? After everything's already destroyed?" She turned to face him, letting her carefully maintained mask slip for the first time. "I'm the girl who grew up watching her mother clean other people's houses. I'm the waitress who served coffee to men like your father, watching them drop more on a bottle of wine than I made in a month." Her words poured out now, a torrent of truth she couldn't stop. "I learned early that beauty was currency, that men like you and your father would give anything to believe in a pretty lie. So I became what you wanted, all of you. The perfect wife, the social butterfly, the charity organizer. I made myself into a mirror, reflecting back whatever you needed to see. And the money." James's voice cracked. "The millions you stole from my company. Insurance," she spat. "Security. Do you know what it's like to be one mistake away from poverty? To know that everything could disappear in an instant? I needed a safety net." The truth of her identity lay between them like shattered glass. Rachel Cooper, the project girl who had clawed her way into high society through any means necessary. The woman who had married a father to get to his son, who had stolen and lied and manipulated her way into a world that had once been far beyond her reach. Richard arrived as the confrontation reached its peak, drawn by an instinct that told him his son needed him. He found them in the kitchen, the air thick with accusations and revealed truths. Rachel's mask was completely gone now, replaced by something harder, more desperate. "You're finished in Boston," Richard declared, his voice heavy with finality. "The police have been notified about the embezzlement. Every door that was once open to you will be closed forever." Rachel's laugh turned hysterical. "You think I didn't prepare for this? You think I don't have enough evidence to destroy both of you? Every dirty deal, every tax evasion, every secret you thought was buried. I found it all." The tension in the room built to a breaking point. Three people bound together by lies and betrayal, each realizing that there was no walking away from this unscathed. The perfect facade had crumbled, revealing the ugly truth beneath. A truth that would soon explode into violence none of them could have anticipated. The storm that had been building finally broke, not with rain, but with the sound of shattering glass as Rachel swept a crystal vase off the counter. The crash seemed to echo through the penthouse, a prelude to the tragedy that was about to unfold. The breaking point had been reached, and there was no turning back from what would happen next. The evening shadows crept across the penthouse walls as Rachel made her final desperate play. Standing between the two Bennett men, Her carefully maintained composure began to crack like fine porcelain under too much pressure. The city lights of Boston twinkled behind her through the floor-to-ceiling windows, witnesses to the unfolding tragedy. "You think you can just throw me away?" Rachel's voice trembled with a mixture of rage and desperation. "After everything I've sacrificed? Everything I've become?" Her hand unconsciously moved to her stomach, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by either man. James stepped forward, his face a mask of controlled fury. "There's nothing left to discuss, Rachel. The police have everything. The embezzlement records, the fraud, all of it." "Really?" Her laugh was sharp, hysterical. "Then I suppose they'd also be interested in the offshore accounts? The creative accounting in both your firms?" She turned to Richard, her eyes glittering with malice. "Or perhaps they'd like to know about those development deals in Dubai. The ones that conveniently avoided certain regulations." Richard's face darkened as he moved closer to his son. "You're playing a dangerous game, Rachel. One you can't win." "Oh, but I think I can," she replied, her hand still resting protectively over her stomach. "Especially when they learn about my condition." The silence that followed was deafening. James felt the floor shift beneath his feet as understanding dawned. "What are you saying?" "I'm pregnant," Rachel announced, her words falling like bombs in the quiet room. 8 weeks along. Her eyes moved between father and son, a cruel smile playing at her lips. "The only question is, which one of you is the father?" The revelation hit both men like a physical blow. James staggered back, his mind racing through calculations, dates, possibilities. Richard's face had gone pale, his hands gripping the back of a chair until his knuckles turned white. "You're lying," James whispered, but doubt had already crept into his voice. "Am I?" Rachel's composure returned slightly, sensing an advantage. "Those business trips you took last month, James, did you really think I spent those nights alone? And Richard, our little reunion meeting in your office 3 months ago. Should we discuss what really happened?" Violence crackled in the air like electricity before a storm. Richard moved first, stepping between Rachel and his son. "This ends now," he growled. "You won't destroy my family with more lies." But Rachel was beyond reason now, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. She reached into her purse, pulling out a thick envelope. "I have proof of everything. Every transaction, every meeting, every secret you both thought was buried. One phone call, and it all goes to the press." James lunged forward, reaching for the envelope, but Rachel danced away, her heel catching on the expensive Persian rug. She stumbled, catching herself against the marble fireplace mantel. "Don't touch me," she screamed, her composed facade completely shattered now. "The baby, if there even is one," Richard's voice was low, dangerous, "doesn't change anything. You're finished in Boston. You don't get to decide that." Rachel's voice rose to a shriek. She grabbed a heavy crystal decanter from the bar cart, brandishing it like a weapon. "I worked too hard, came too far to let you take everything from me." The next few moments unfolded in slow motion. Rachel swung the decanter at James as he approached. Richard moved to protect his son, catching the full force of the blow. The sound of shattering crystal mixed with Rachel's scream as Richard stumbled backward, blood appearing at his temple. "Dad!" James's cry of anguish echoed through the penthouse as he caught his father's falling body. Rachel stood frozen, the broken neck of the decanter still clutched in her hand, watching as blood spread across the white marble floor. Her perfect world, built on lies and manipulation, was literally crashing down around her. "What have you done?" James's voice was barely a whisper as he cradled his father's head. The reality of what she had done seemed to hit Rachel all at once. The broken decanter fell from her trembling fingers, shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces on the floor. She backed away, her designer heels crunching on broken crystal, leaving bloody footprints on the pristine marble. "I never meant," she began, but the words died in her throat as Richard's eyes fluttered closed. The sound of sirens in the distance grew louder, marking the approach of an ending none of them had foreseen. The perfect life Rachel had schemed and killed for was over, destroyed in a moment of violence that could never be undone. The night air filled with the sounds of approaching police cars, their red and blue lights painting the penthouse walls in alternating colors of judgment. Rachel stood in the center of the chaos she had created, her hands covered in blood, her carefully constructed world reduced to shattered crystal and broken dreams. The truth had finally emerged, but truth wasn't enough to save any of them from the tragedy that had been building since the day Rachel first set her sights on the Bennett family. As police sirens wailed closer, the three players in this tragedy remained frozen in a tableau of destruction. One fallen, one broken, and one forever changed by the violence that greed and desperation had wrought. Blue and red lights painted the walls of Boston's most exclusive high-rise as police officers led Rachel Anderson-Bennett through the marble lobby in handcuffs. Her Chanel dress was stained with Richard Bennett's blood, her carefully applied makeup streaked with tears. The doorman who had once bowed to her every whim now watched with barely concealed disgust as she was placed in the back of a police car. In the penthouse above, forensics teams worked methodically through the scene of tragedy. Richard Bennett's body lay where he had fallen, the marble floor around him a constellation of blood and shattered crystal. James sat in his father's study at Beacon Hill, his world reduced to the rhythmic ticking of an antique clock and the weight of unbearable loss. The media descended like vultures, hungry for every detail of the scandal that would rock Boston's elite society. Headlines screamed across every platform. Socialite wife charged in real estate mogul's death. Bennett family tragedy. A web of lies exposed. From rags to riches to ruin. The Rachel Anderson story. Detective Sarah Martinez stood before a wall of evidence in the precinct, piecing together Rachel's elaborate schemes. Each new discovery painted a picture more disturbing than the last. Birth records revealed her true identity, Rachel Marie Cooper, born to a teenage mother in South Boston's housing projects. Financial investigations uncovered a pattern of fraud and manipulation stretching back years before she had ever met the Bennetts. She was meticulous, Martinez explained to her partner, spreading out documents across her desk. Every move calculated, every relationship weaponized. The Bennetts weren't her first targets, just her most ambitious. The investigation revealed other victims. 3 wealthy men across different cities, each manipulated, some married briefly, all left financially and emotionally devastated. Rachel had refined her technique with each conquest, learning from her mistakes, building toward her ultimate goal, the Bennett fortune. In the county jail, Rachel sat in her cell, her designer clothes exchanged for an orange jumpsuit. The pregnancy she had claimed turned out to be another lie, a final desperate attempt to maintain control. Her carefully constructed world had crumbled completely, leaving only the truth of who she really was, a con artist who had finally overplayed her hand. James threw himself into unraveling the extent of Rachel's deception. The embezzlement from his firm had nearly bankrupted him, but the financial damage paled in comparison to the psychological toll. Every memory of their life together was now tainted, every moment of perceived happiness revealed as carefully orchestrated manipulation. The investigation into the Bennett family's businesses revealed the true scope of Rachel's ambitions. She had positioned herself to potentially control both James's architectural firm and significant portions of Richard's real estate empire. Documents found in her private safe outlined plans spanning years into the future, each step calculated to accumulate more power, more wealth, more control. Kate Morrison finally came forward with the full story, unable to bear the weight of her silence any longer. She described watching Rachel's transformation from ambitious young woman to master manipulator. She started small, Kate testified, learning to mimic the mannerisms of wealthy women, practicing their accents, studying their habits. But something broke in her along the way. The desire for wealth became an obsession that consumed everything else. The impact on Boston's social scene was seismic. Those who had once competed for Rachel's attention now denied ever knowing her. Charity boards scrambled to distance themselves from her influence. The carefully curated photographs of their perfect life together disappeared from social media, leaving only the harsh reality of news coverage and police reports. In the aftermath, investigators discovered journals dating back to Rachel's early days. The pages revealed a methodical study of wealth and power, lists of potential targets, strategies for infiltrating high society. Her transformation from Rachel Cooper to Rachel Anderson had been just the first step in a journey that would ultimately lead to destruction. As autumn turned to winter, the trial began. The courtroom became a stage for the final act of Rachel's performance. But this time, her carefully practiced charm fell flat against the weight of evidence. The jury saw through the tears, the claims of emotional abuse, the attempts to paint herself as a victim of circumstance. The verdict was swift and severe. Rachel Anderson, born Rachel Cooper, was sentenced to 25 years for the death of Richard Bennett, with additional charges of fraud and embezzlement adding to her sentence. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom. Your actions represent not just a crime against the Bennett family, but a calculated assault on the trust that binds our society together. James attended the sentencing, watching as the woman he had loved was led away to begin her prison term. The woman who had shared his bed, his dreams, his life, was revealed as a stranger. A carefully constructed fiction designed to separate him from his wealth and destroy his family. In the end, the true cost of Rachel's ambition could not be measured in dollars or years behind bars. It was calculated in the destruction of lives, the shattering of trust, the irreparable damage to a family legacy. The Bennett name would recover, but the scars would remain, a cautionary tale of how ambition unchecked by morality leads only to destruction. The Boston Globe's final piece on the scandal ended with a quote from James Bennett. "My father used to say that true wealth isn't measured in money, but in the trust we place in others." Rachel didn't just steal our money, she stole our ability to trust. That's a debt that can never be repaid. As winter settled over Boston Harbor, the city's elite found themselves examining their own lives, their own relationships, wondering what other secrets might lurk beneath perfectly maintained facades. Rachel Cooper's story became a whispered warning in social circles, a reminder that sometimes the highest price we pay is for the lies we choose to believe. The penthouse where it all ended remained empty, its marble floors cleaned of blood but forever stained by the memory of that fatal night. In his father's study, James Bennett kept a single photograph, not of Rachel, but of his father in happier times, a reminder that some things are worth more than all the wealth in the world. The true cost of ambition, when divorced from humanity, had been paid in full. And in the end, no amount of money, power, or social status could purchase redemption for a soul consumed by greed.